To minimize the impact of rolling on the edge of your cast off when you have a stockinette field, you can add an icord. So I'm going to add the icord using a different color just so you see it. And the way I do that is I basically pull up a loop to start my cast on. You can cast on however you'd like. You just need to have somewhere between 3 and 5 additional stitches, sometimes as many as 10 depending upon the gauge, but in general between 3 and 5 is the number I recommend. Now I'm actually working this yarn at the wrong gauge so you can see my hands and using the big needles a little bit better. So I've put on a total of 4. Now the way I do the icord edge is a little bit different. I do not incorporate the additional yarn overs that some other knitters would recommend. It's completely up to you. The additional yarn overs are just going to make the icord a little bit chubbier. Now at this point, when I get to the last one I just cast on for my icord and my last stitch of my work, I can do that, where I basically just knit 2 together through the back of the loop, and that will give this stitch the chance to hide behind this one on the icord, and then I feed them back to the left and I start again. There are my 3. And I can either do these 2 through the back of the loop, as I did with the previous one, or I could use a slip knit. I could even use a knit 2 together. So let's see what those different stitches are going to look like as we do those. Slip, and then knit. Slip, knit is going to look almost exactly like knitting through the back of the loop. But let me show you. Now with this method, it is best to be using the same colors for your icord as your stockinette field. Slip, and then knit, because otherwise you're going to get, if you look in between the last stitch and the stitch that's underneath it from the slip knit or the knit through to the back of the loop, you do see the shadow of the other color. Now, if they're both the same color, you wouldn't notice it. But because I have used 2 different colors just to highlight the difference, you can see it if you look. If you do the method in the video for using the additional yarn over, this will be minimized, but it will still always be there a little bit. So the other way that you can do your icord would be to give it a little bit more of an architectural element, rather than either the slip knit that we did here for this one, or the knit 2 together through the back of the loop as we did here. You could just knit 2 together and then watch what happens. When you knit 2 together, you get a completely different element. It almost starts to look like the last stitch is a braid, which can be very interesting as well. feed them back again. These two were knit two together. Notice how the field of stitches from our stockinette field are now sitting atop the I-cord, the last stitch of the I-cord, to give it a different architectural element, almost like it's hanging on, whereas the slip slip knit and the knit two together through the back of the loop hides the field of stockinette's final stitch behind. I personally prefer to do it as a slip slip knit or knit two together through the back of the loop, but really it's completely up to you. It's your project. The important thing to keep in mind when you're doing an I-cord is how many stitches are in your I-cord and how you're joining it to your work. So consistency is what really matters. Down, because otherwise, if you're not consistent, you start to see an unusual patterning, right? So you want to make sure that however you've elected to do your I-cord edge, that you are consistent. And that will keep it more tidy. So by being inconsistent in my edge, I'm not getting these nice tidy stitches. Now let me just get to the end of this one. Now the interesting thing about the I-cord edge is when you get to the end of the I-cord, you're going to want to take your live stitches, which are the ones on the I-cord, because after you've used all of these stitches from your work in incorporating into the I-cord, you're going to just want to bind off those last few stitches, which you can do by any method that you like. So here's the last stitch. So what we can do here is, since it's only a 4-stitch I-cord, the easiest way to finish it off is just to pull the yarn through, pull it, and then secure it behind the work. You could also use a regular bind off. If you use a regular bind off, just remember that when you cast off those last few stitches are going to need to be tucked underneath so you don't see that selvage edge. Watch. Because even though they are going to roll onto each other a little bit, they're still not going to be completely obscured. See here, they've rolled onto each other. First off, do that. So this bind off being done only with the last stitches, the last 4 stitches of our I-cord, comes a little bit proud of the edge of our fabric. Now what we could do here instead, so we don't have this little jog, would be on the last row of the I-cord, on the last row of the I-cord, we could do the bind off edge, and that will get rid of that little jog. Or you can just finish it like you'd finish a hat by pulling the yarn through the live stitches and securing it in the back of the work. Now here, there's that last stitch. There's our I-cord. And there, the way I'm going to manipulate this, see how I just have this now? It's just one stitch to tuck behind. So the way the I-cord works is if you look at the other side of the I-cord, it was 4 knit stitches. I'm effectively working in the round because I'm passing the stitches back and forth. And what it does is the weight of the I-cord, even this one that is not quite the way we want it to look because we want to be consistent about how we elect to do our connection, is that it helps the work lie flat. So here's the cast on, or the bind. Here's the bind off or cast off, and here's our cast on. The cast on has this little bit of a loop to it. If we wanted to do the same type of treatment to a selvage edge, there are a couple ways to do that, and we'll talk about that next.